Good morning. Let's take a look at the area of knowledge of ethics and how we use ethics and pull apart ethics within using it in TOK. It's certainly a bigger topic, and this is not meant to give you a detailed understanding, but just to give you an overview of what ethics would be. Sorry about that. To do that, theory of knowledge gives us what's called a knowledge framework for examining areas of knowledge. And it's good to know what this is, but I truly don't know if it's going to come up for you in your presentations. It might for your essays next year. But within the knowledge framework, the theory of not or the IB likes to look at five big areas of diving into the knowledge framework: scope and applications, and concept and language. Uh, those two things I like to group together and just say those two that go into like what it is. What is ethics? And then methodology and historical development is like how we would use it, especially how we'd use it in ethic or in TOK, and then certainly links to personal knowledge. So to start off with what ethics is, and ethics at its root is what is right and what is wrong. So before we go too far, and this is sort of fun to do in class, but I'd like you to write down in your notes just three examples of what is good and what you consider bad. So three examples of what would be good actions and what would be bad actions. Pause the video, take a minute, write it down. Now, when we look at ethics and study it, the things that you wrote down, I bet you if we asked the whole class, there are some things that are uniquely personal to you, things that you consider good or bad. But I bet there's also some universality to it. There are things that are good, like you should not kill other people, or you should treat other people with respect. Things that are bad, like you shouldn't take other people's stuff, or you should not violate other people's personal things. So ethics is both personal but also universal. It's also a subject that's uniquely not taught anywhere by the IB. So ethics is underpinning of a lot of what we do, but it's not necessarily taught specifically. So let's deal with some of that first. It's uniquely personal, but also universal. I took this from a book, one of the TOK books that I've got about ethics, and I just like that we look at major world religions, and whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Hinduism, like all of these have underpinnings of very basic things that are right and wrong. So, and you can certainly read them all the way. I'm not going to go through them all with you, but ethics is definitely universal. Right and wrong is definitely universal to a degree, but it's also very personal. And these are some components we're going to look at today. I also wanted to point out it's not taught by the IB, but it really is an underpinning of everything the IB does. The IB requires or seeks to develop us as inquiring and knowledgeable individuals and caring young people to create a more better and peaceful world. So ethics is there. So what is ethics is simply a right or wrong. It's both personal and universal, and it's an underpinning of everything that we do. How do you use it? What does the IB expect of us? So let's talk about some terminology. And please put these in your notes. We'll spend some time with the last three. But specifically, ethics is relative, which means depending on the place and time in which we study it, it could mean different things. The picture I have on the slide is a pretty typical example. The ancient Romans pitted gladiators and slaves and prisoners in gladiatorial battles where they fought to the death. Is that wrong today? Absolutely. That would never happen. But was it wrong back then? Well, that's where we get into ethical relativism. It's there certainly probably were Romans or some faiths who said that, or some religions that said this is a wrong thing to do in the ancient Roman times, but it was generally accepted as an acceptable form of entertainment. Definitely considered wrong today. And you could look at any time period in history and pick out something that's relatively right or wrong. You could look at slavery in the American South during the 17 and 1800s. Certainly, were there people that said that this is wrong? Absolutely. But it was generally accepted as an okay institution. I'm not condoning it now, but it's an example of ethical relativism. What bothers me sometimes in looking at what we do in our culture today is what will our grandchildren's generation look at and say is certainly something we wouldn't consider today. Because it's relative to a degree. But please don't think, just because it's relative, that we can't do anything with it. We certainly study how different theories or different thoughts look at right and wrong. Some that I'd like to introduce you to today are deontological ethics, consequentialist ethics, and virtue ethics. Again, just so you have an understanding of what they are, and you could use them in your presentations or your essays. Deontological ethics or deontological theories are theories proposed by Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher, who thought that good or bad could be determined by the good that one intends to come from the action. So not necessarily what happened, but what was the good that was intended to happen from it. And you can start kind of evaluating some of these good or bad by, what if everyone did it that way? Or how would things be this if everyone acted this way? Good and bad comes from the intention of what was supposed to happen. Interesting. Is that always the right way to evaluate? Probably not, but it's one way. A second way was the consequentialist theories, proposed here by Jeremy Bentham in Utilitarianism, but more generally, just actions are judged right or wrong by the consequence or the outcome of the action. And it's always tricky because the outcome could be judged from different perspectives. So if we look at slavery in the American South by white landowners, consequentialist theory would say that definitely that's an okay thing to do. But as an African slave, definitely not. So perspectives are important here. I've written examples like taking from the rich and giving to the poor, or harming one to save the lives of others. Like, it really depends on the perspective of the outcome of the action, right? So Jeremy Bentham took it a step further and said that utilitarianism is how we measure, how we look at the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So not just good or bad, but how does this affect society? Bentham's ideas in the 1800s kind of helped develop what democracy looks like today. The greatest good for the greatest number isn't always good, right? Because we're always missing minority views in that sort of look. Jeremy Bentham is an interesting dude. If you want to study, here's his mummified body on display in London. His head is also mummified, but it didn't age well, so they don't put his head on display all the time. There's a wax head on his body. I apologize for the next slide, but only sort of. Bentham was an interesting dude. Bentham there's a quote from a London newspaper who had studied Jeremy Bentham, and his head, you can skip it, it's not important. He was notably eccentric, reclusive, and difficult to get hold of. He called his walking stick Dapple, his teapot Dickie, and kept an elderly cat named the Sir Reverend John Langbourne. Does it have anything to do with ethics? No, but Jeremy Bentham is one interesting dude to take a look at. The third type of ethics is called value ethics, proposed by Aristotle, or first founded by Aristotle, a great Greek philosopher, where the actions were judged right or wrong by the character of the person rather than the action that happened. And a couple more notes here, but it's an important way to take a look at it. So we're going to take a look at these three theories, but before we do, one last thing to say. When we connect ethics in these three theories, I want you to think about how they also connect to the ways of knowing of reason, emotion, and faith, how actions can be judged, and how they connect with reason, how we use logic, or emotion or faith to consider those actions. So some decision making I want you to think about, and I've linked these videos on the agenda slide or there in the description of this video here on YouTube. The first one is with Sniffy the rat. An individual took a rat from a pet store that would have been destined to be in the belly of a snake and said that this rat should be performance art and this rat's going to die. We're going to smash him between two pieces of paper with a big old cement block. The question here is, should a rat that's going to be sold as pet food be allowed to be used in performance art? What I want you to do, and so for to judge right or wrong, this is an extreme example to start. I want you to make some quick notes in your notebook. Based on deontological ethics or deontological theories, is killing Sniffy the rat good based on what's intended to come from it? All right, so I want you to write a sentence. Is that good based on the intention of what's going to come from it? Secondly, as a consequentialist, what is the good what's the outcome of the action? Can we judge the action as good or bad based on that and that alone? Okay. What about the value or the ethical character of the individual? And for that one, you're going to have to watch the video. Okay. So not what happened or not what the intention was, but who is the individual that's committing this action? Okay. I want you to, and we'll go over these when we come back together in class, but for issue number 1 with Sniffy the rat, how would you evaluate, how would you judge the right or wrong of that situation? Issue number 2 is the trolley problem. If there were a runaway trolley on a track, and it was destined to kill 5 workers on the track here, Would you divert it? Would you divert it and send it down another track where it would potentially harm or kill a individual working on this track? Please watch a video that I've linked. Is this a smart thing to do if you're the person standing here and can change the track going one way or another? Again, try to make a statement about what about the intention? What about the consequence? And what about the value of the character of the person? Can you make different ethical judgments based on those three things? Last one. This one is going to take more time to get into. It's a longer video, so if you don't get there because of the length of this lecture and you're taking notes, that's fine, but take a look at the Milgram experiment. It's a little bit more dark and disturbing, but an experiment about how far you will carry out authority and follow authority. To what extent will subjects of the experiment obey authority? And this one's deep and dark. So watch the video. It's about 7 minutes, I believe. Deontologically, how would you judge the intention of the individual's actions, and is it good or bad, or the outcome or the value of people? So take a look and let me know what you think, because this one has so many layers to it, and we will talk about it. So the takeaway, what I want you guys to get from this is you have to be able to say, for both TOK and just a general understanding of life, ethics is more than just how individuals make choices or what good and bad is or how we get to that. You need to be able to talk about more than just that. Ethics is tricky because it's both personal and universal. So you can't just say, well, it all depends. So good and bad just depends. Well, that's a cop-out, sort of, because you need to think a little bit deeper than that. There are ethical theories or ethical studies that we can get into. I introduced 3 to you: deontological ethics, consequentialist ethics, or virtue ethics. If nothing else, when you try to present for your IB presentation, stick with those. They're the biggies. You certainly can get into more than that. And I wanted to do this one last because it's certainly not the most important, but ethics is relative. Depending on who you are, the time that we live in, or the cultures that we live in is certainly different. So it's tricky also to cast a judgment on others, even other people living in the same time as you, because living in another country or another culture or another town might present a situation as differently good or bad. So the goal here today was to just give you an overview of the area of knowledge of ethics and how you might use it within the theory of knowledge. It is by no means a comprehensive overview of what needs to happen with ethics in our study. So hopefully this helps, and we'll take a look at it together as a class when we come back together. Thanks.